Welcome back if you've been here already this week. Welcome for the first time if this is your first time. Hopefully it won't be your last. These are on every day, 12 and 1, and so lots of opportunities to really engage, ask questions. And so do be texting in those questions. Ideally do it as the talk goes on. It's perfectly fine to have your phone out and be texting during my talk. Provided, of course, that is someone asks a question, otherwise I'll know you've just been texting your mates, okay? So text in as we go through, and then we'll get through as many as we can at the end. And we finish by 10 to 2, if you're worried about rushing off to a lecture or anything. Well, I guess it's probably sport this afternoon, isn't it? So we're looking at this question of the environment. In the last lunch bar, Julia was speaking about the subject of suffering. Why doesn't God care about the suffering of the world? And now we're thinking about the issue of the environment. It's interesting that you can tell a lot about the fears of a society by the films that they make. And if you look back at the films over the last few decades, you can see the kind of fears that people have had. Fear of nuclear meltdown, which is very prevalent in the 60s during the Cold War. Fear of terrorism, more of a modern problem. Back in the 90s, fear of alien invasion, not sure where that came from, with things like Independence Day and such like. Fear of asteroids hitting the Earth, that was one. But actually, what's interesting, in the last few years, one of the fears that's been shown in our films is fear of environmental disaster. I think the first film to put that forwards recently was the film The Day After Tomorrow. Do you remember that one? It's always kind of strange going to the box office to buy the tickets. Hi, can I have tickets for The Day After Tomorrow? Why are you coming today? And then it was even worse when we got to 2012, because of course it was before 2012, so it's like, hi, can I have tickets for 2012? It's like that far in advance. But both films were kind of presenting this idea of basically, environmentalism and environmental concern is a huge concern for our worlds. And it's certainly in the media a lot, isn't it? Rising sea levels, climate change. Someone suggested that on the current trends, that if CO2 levels continue to rise as they are, by the middle of this century, ice caps might have melted to such an extent that even London would be underwater, which I guess if you're a Glaswegian might be a good thing, but not a good thing because you're also at sea level, so you'll also be underwater as well. But seriously, one of the government advisors, a man called David King, said, quote, global warming is a bigger threat than terrorism. And so this is a huge issue that has come to the fore. And now, of course, there's a lot of debates, and probably in a room like this, there are people who have different ideas, different concerns. There's a lot of suspicion on both sides of the debates about the statistics that are used, and other things are kind of geared to try and support the arguments. But what is absolutely clear, I think, is that through history and still today, as human beings, we've often ravaged, pillaged, and abused this world in which we live. And we haven't treated it in the way that we should, in a sustainable way. That is absolutely clear, however much you debate the impact that has long term. Now what's this all got to do with Christian Union? You might be thinking, well, okay, how does this go together? Well, actually, it's very interesting that a lot of people would say that part of the problem that we've seen in our world with the environmental concerns is the fact that belief in God, and explicitly the Christian God, seems to lead to more of the problem. That if you are a Christian and hold beliefs according to the Bible, that rather than causing you to care for the environment, it actually causes you to do the opposite. And people cite different things for that. Some people would look at America, which is often perceived to be quite a Christian nation. It's only 4% of the world's population, but produces 24% of the world's carbon emissions. And often has not made the same efforts that maybe others have to try and reduce that. One government official in the States said the way to reduce global warming was to install more air conditioning, which is amusing but also incredibly sad, isn't it? Maybe one of the other reasons why people have thought this is that it often seems that Christians aren't really concerned about physical things like the world and the trees and the environment. They're concerned about spiritual things like God and prayer and church. Why would Christians get their hands dirty? Why would they care about that? They seem to have this dichotomy, this divide, secular and spiritual, the physical and the spiritual. And then maybe a third reason why this is an issue specifically when it comes to the Christian claim is that Christianity talks about the second coming of Jesus. And so a lot of people perceive this to be the case. Why would you care about the environment if you think that you're going to leave this world and float off to heaven? Does it really matter how you look after this world? That's certainly what one Christian government official said in the States. He said, we don't need to look after the environment, the second coming is at hand. So don't worry about the world, just do with it what you like, because it's all going to be destroyed anyway. So that would be what we would often perceive as the Christian kind of response to the environment. And it would seem, obviously, that other worldviews might have more to say and more to offer in terms of a motivation for caring for the environment. You know, in a materialistic worldview, this world is all you've got, so you've got to look after it. Otherwise, well, you've got nothing left. If this one goes wrong, that's it. Or in a pantheistic worldview, pantheism says that God is not the creator of the world, but is the world. So it's not that God made the tree, but God is the tree. You get that coming through in films like Avatar. This idea that God and creation are one and the same. And again, in that situation, you'd be thinking, well, I would think twice about chopping the tree down if I thought that tree is God, wouldn't you? So again, that worldview seems to have more to offer in terms of motivation when it comes to caring for the environment. Worth stopping though, just for a second and thinking, is that actually the case? I mean, take atheism, for instance, a materialistic worldview. This world's all you've got. Okay, on that level you might say that we should look after it because it's all we've got, but you might also say, well, on what basis? On what moral basis? We looked the other day at Hume and how Hume said in a naturalistic system you can't get an ought from an is. So why should we say you ought to do this or you ought not to do this if this is a materialistic system? If it benefits me, why should I care if it doesn't benefit someone on the other side of the world? And then what about the pantheistic worldview? You know, God isn't just the creator of the tree, he is the tree. Well, you have to remember in that worldview, God isn't just a tree. God is everything. He's not just Hawaii, he's Haiti, and a hurricane, and Hitler. So, okay, we should preserve the tree, but actually how do we distinguish between what is good and bad? Why should we care for the good bits that we like in nature and not for the bad bits? What is nature? Raises all sorts of questions, doesn't it, when it comes to that? So I don't think those worldviews necessarily help us as much as we might think. Now, what of the Christian worldview? Well, what I want to do is just give you 3 reasons, kind of fairly quickly, but they're big reasons, and you may want to ask questions in a moment, as to why I think actually the Christian worldview, informed by the Bible, does give us a really good motivation to care for this world. And the first reason in the Christian worldview is this: God made it. You need to read the first couple of chapters of the Bible, and I know Christians and others will disagree over the exact time and method that God used to make it, but the underlying thing is God made it, and he made it good. Several times after each stage of creation, it says it was good, it was good, it was good, and then at the end, after everything is created, bold, italic and underlined, it was very good. The world that God made was good, and God created people to live in that world, to enjoy it. Creation is good. Now that's very different to some other worldviews. Take the Islamic worldview. The world was never a good place originally designed for us. Heaven was the place designed for us. World is where we end up because we rejected God. But actually in the biblical worldview, no, this world was once originally good. God created it. And he created it to be enjoyed. That's why as a Christian I can worship God just as much when I'm cycling across Europe or windsurfing across Poole Harbour as I can if I'm singing songs in church. Okay? This world is designed to be enjoyed. My body is made to experience pleasure and joy. It's a good thing. God made it. Now of course, coupled with that, it's also important to say, as Julia said in the last talk, something's gone wrong. We're in a glorious ruin. So this good world has been broken and distorted by people's rejection of God. So we see the effects of that. It's like a virus in a computer that affects every aspect of the working of a computer. So the Bible says this thing, sin, this rejection of God, has affected the very way that our world, our cosmos works. It's scarred, it's groaning, it's broken. And yet in spite of that, because God made this world and it's still his creation and still loved by him, the Bible says it's still our job as human beings to care for it. That was the command that was given to the first human beings, and it was never repealed. It still exists today. That this is a good world that we're to steward, we're to look after. We're not to abuse. And actually in the Old Testament there were laws specifically given to the nation of Israel as to how they were to look after the environment. Laws about how they should treat animals against animal cruelty. Laws about how they should treat their crops and the land. Because God cares about those kind of physical things. Okay? So that's the first thing. God made it, and so it's good, and we should look after it. But here's the second reason. Secondly, God became part of it. Often, as I said in the introduction, people have this idea that there's this divide between the physical and the spiritual. Christians are only interested in spiritual things. That influence is actually less of a Christian influence and much more of a Gnostic Greek influence. This idea that the physical was bad and the spiritual was good. And sadly, it's an influence that has infiltrated Christianity down through the years, but was never truly a biblical one, an original Christian idea. Because Christianity, as the name suggests, is founded on Jesus Christ. And the claim right at the heart of the Bible is that the God who created the universe has stepped into space and time and became part of it. Not as the later Gnostic Gospel suggested, a kind of ghost, but as a real human being that could be seen and touched and felt. He was physical. So the Christian claim is massive, that God took on physicality. So physicality can't be evil. Flesh and blood is not bad, because God became it. God endorsed the physical world most fully by becoming part of it. And so God says this world is good. It's not that just the spiritual things are good, the physical things are good as well. He made it, he became part of it, and endorsed it. And then thirdly, it also says that God will redeem it as well. A lot of people have this kind of idea that basically the Christian hope, as we said at the beginning, is that Jesus comes again, the Christians float off to heaven and everyone else is shut out in the dark. And this world is blowtorched into oblivion. Of course, if that's the case, why should we care about the environment? You wouldn't, would you? But actually that's not, I would suggest, the message of the Bible at all. Right at the heart of the Bible, as I said, is the message that God became human in the person of Jesus, lived and died, but most crucially, that he rose again. It's the very centre and the foundation of the Christian claim. So important that on Friday evening, we're going to spend the whole night looking at the evidence and the implications for it and of it. And if you're thinking, well, just let me phrase that as a freebie, okay? If you're thinking, resurrection is ridiculous, I'm a 21st century clever person, I got into Glasgow, thank you very much, I'm not going to buy it. Well, as well as coming on Friday, let me just throw this one out. First century Jews didn't find believing in the resurrection any easier than you probably do. And they expected it to happen no more than you would expect it to happen. Just for different reasons. The idea for them that God was going to become human, live on planet Earth, die on a Roman cross, 3 days later rise from the dead in the middle of history, that was no more part of their worldview and expectations than it is for us. They didn't believe it because it was easy, they believed it because they were convinced it was true by the evidence. So that's why I would suggest come on Friday and look at it. But if it happens, the resurrection of Jesus is very important. You see, what we see when Jesus rises from the dead is something that totally surprised both the Jewish and the Greek worldview of the time. They had ideas of life after death. But what happened to Jesus was so strange because it was physical and it was real. So one of the first things Jesus says after he's risen from the dead, I mean, I don't know what you would expect Jesus to say after he's risen from the dead. You know, something like, you know, I am the Lord of the universe. But actually, do you know what he says? He says, come have breakfast. That's one of the first things Jesus does. He says to his mates, come on, I've cooked some fish. I'd rather have bacon, but you know, they were soon to have that as well. But let's have some breakfast. Because Jesus is a physical person. He eats physical food. He's touched. He can be seen and believed and related to. And the important thing the Bible says is that because Jesus rose from the dead physically, he is our prototype, or to use the biblical expression, our first fruits. He's the example of what will ultimately happen to all who trust in him. So the Christian hope is not, I get a soul that floats in the cloud, but I get a real body, just like Jesus got a real body. This body resurrected. Now, if your impression of heaven is a cloud, what's the problem if you've got a real body? Well, you're going to fall through, aren't you? Much as I love to step out of a plane and live on the clouds, I know it isn't a place that I could be. And seriously, the Bible says that because we're going to have real physical bodies in the future, actually those real physical bodies would require a real physical world. Now this is where it gets really radical, because the Bible doesn't actually say that the hope of Christians is to go off to heaven at all, but actually that this world will be redeemed and transformed. So though this world, this physical world now, is broken, damaged and groaning, one day God isn't going to blowtorch it into oblivion, but he's going to cleanse it, purify it and redeem it. It will be renewed and transformed. So God doesn't say this world is bad and I'm going to get rid of it. He says it's good. And although it's broken, one day I'm going to transform it. I'm going to get rid of the rubbish and the injustice and the stuff that spoils it. And I'm going to make it new. That's a very different view, isn't it? The Christian hope is not floating off to become a soul on a cloud, but to have a real physical body in this world renewed. That starts to change how you view our view of heaven and the future and now. It's not escapism, it's real. And this idea of this new creation is something that comes through in someone like C.S. Lewis's book, the Narnia series. I don't know if you've read the Narnia series. They're worth reading as well as just watching the films. But in the last book, called The Last Battle, they have obviously had a big battle, and they all think they're going to die, but then they end up in a stable, and inside the stable they find a whole new world. And they go into this world, and they're discussing amongst themselves where they are. Because it's beautiful, it's stunning, it's gorgeous. And it goes like this. If you ask me, said Edmund, it's like somewhere in the Narnian world. Look at those mountains ahead. Surely they're rather like the mountains we used to see from Narnia. And so they are, said Peter, only these are bigger. And those hills, said Lucy, aren't they like the southern borders of Narnia? Like, cried Edmund after a moment's silence. Why, they're exactly like. And yet they're not like, said Lucy. They're different. They have more colours on them, and they look further away than I remembered them, and they're more, oh, I don't know. More like the real thing, said the Lord Diggory softly. Suddenly, Farsight the eagle spread his wings, soared 30 or 40 feet up into the air, circled round and alighted on the ground. Kings and queens, he cried, we've all been blind. We're only beginning to see where we are. From up there I've seen it all. Narnia is not dead. This is Narnia. And the glorious hope they come into is that the Narnia they thought had gone is actually being transformed and renewed. And C.S. Lewis, as a Christian, was trying to express in literature that biblical hope. That it's this world, with its mountains and its Himalayas and its Alps and its Great Barrier Reefs, this world that is going to be transformed and redeemed. That's the biblical hope. Which actually, incidentally, and although this relates to a talk we're going to look at tomorrow, is why Christianity is very different to other religions. Because the Christian hope is unique. Vinod Tharamachanda is a Sri Lankan Christian, hence why I can't pronounce his name very well. But he said this. He said, our salvation lies not in the escape from this world, but in the transformation of this world. Everything good and true and beautiful in history is not lost forever, but will be restored and directed to the worship of God. All our human activity in the arts and the sciences, economics and politics, and I could add to that the environment, and even the non-human creation will be brought to share in the liberating rule of God. This grand vision centres on the cross of Jesus Christ. You will not find this hope for the world in any other religious systems or philosophies of humankind. The biblical vision is unique. That's why when some say there is salvation in other faiths, I ask them, what salvation are you talking about? No faith holds out the promise of eternal salvation for the world the way the cross and the resurrection of Jesus do. See what they're saying? It's hope for this world. What difference does that make? It makes all the difference in this world because it means that what we do in this world matters. It's not going to be annihilated, ultimately, like a materialist might have to say. It's not going to be destroyed while we all float off to heaven, like a religious person might say, but it's going to be renewed. So what I do in this world matters. How I treat this world matters. Planting trees, looking after the environment, recycling things, they really do matter. Because the hope is not for it to be destroyed, but redeemed. That's not to say, of course, that other people don't care for the environment. I'm not naive enough to think that it's only Christians that care about the environment. But I would say, I think the biblical worldview gives us the best and the biggest and the most hopeful motivation for looking after the environment of all. And that gives me great encouragement. It's a great motivation, which is why there are Christians who, inspired by this worldview, are seeking to do that. There's an organisation called Arosha, A-R-O-C-H-A, search for it online, which exists to look into these environmental issues, inspired by their worldview as Christians, to do that in sustainable ways in different parts of the world. They really do care. It really is a good motivation. But just lastly, before we have questions, there's one other motivation that I think really helps me when it comes to looking at this world. I'll give you an illustration. I guess maybe some of you have at some points hired a car, or maybe at some point in the future you will. I love hiring cars, they're not mine. And the great thing about hiring a car is you can treat it however you like, as long as it doesn't have scratches on when you get back. You know, burn some rubber, have some fun. It's a hire car after all. But I wonder, I guess some of us have also borrowed a car off a friend. Have you ever done that? Now here's a question. If you borrow a car off your best friend, do you treat it differently to the way you treat a hire car? I guess the answer is probably yes. Certainly is in my case. Do you know why? Because I know the person who I've hired it off, borrowed it off. I have a relationship with them. It's not some distant organisation, but it's my mates who owns this. And the Bible says that as Christians, if we come to know Jesus, we know the one who has given us this world as a gift. We know him personally, we have a relationship with him. And so I treat this world out of respect, not because I know some distant deity, but I know God as a present reality. And caring for this world is part of that relationship that I have with God. I treat this world as a gift from him, a wonderful gift to be enjoyed, but a gift that still belongs ultimately to him, to be stewarded, to be cared for in the right way. And I would say that's a great motivation. Now, don't know what you think about all of that. Maybe you've got questions. I'm sure, hopefully, you've been texting them in. We'll go to questions just in a moment. Just before we have questions, let me say two things. Firstly, you might be wondering about this, thinking, well, where are you at? Maybe you're here and you're saying, look, you've made a whole load of claims that I don't really buy. And, you know, that's true. I have covered a lot of material that I haven't given lots of evidential backup for, like the resurrection, so do come back on Friday. But one of the things that would be the best thing to do would be to take that little book that's on your chairs, or maybe under your chairs, or you're sitting on it or whatever now, and have a read of that. That's an account of the life of Jesus. That is the basis of the whole Christian claim. Check it out for yourself. So many people I find have rejected all of this and said it's rubbish, but they've never really investigated it. And another thing you can do is you can actually come along and check it out in a group situation. We're going to have a course called Uncover, same name as the book. And it's going to start next week, and it's for you to really investigate for yourself these claims of Christianity. So we'd love you to come to that and be able to investigate further. So just while we're having the Q&A, do pick up those books, and then connected to the books, just inside the cover, there should be a little slip of paper. That's our little feedback form. We'd love you to just fill it out while we have the Q&A. Can you just grab that now? And there should be a pen as well. Fill it out, leave some comments about the events. Everyone can do that, and if you want to do it anonymously, that's fine. But if you would like information about that course called Uncover, an opportunity to unlock and uncover the Christian claim further, tick the box that says, tell me more. Leave your details, and we'll get in touch with you and let you know about when and where that course is going to be taking place. And we'd love you to come on it. So fill them out, tick the box if you want. There's going to be a box at the door for you to put them in, but you can do that now so you have time to do it during the Q&A. The other thing to say is, sorry, I've got a little bit over time. I get very excited talking about this biblical hope of a new creation. So excited that I actually wrote a book about it. And on the bookstall at the back, there's a book called What Kind of Hope, which really unlocks this whole biblical worldview much more fully than I've been able to do in 20 minutes. So I'd love to recommend that to you. It also looks at the resurrection as the basis for it, and looks at the evidence for it as well. So if you're our guest today, you can have this for £1. Take that away and have a read. If you're a member of the CU, you can still have it fairly cheaply, but it's not quite so subsidised. And if you want to leave the CU to get it cheaper, then don't, okay? But there's that, there's other books too. Now, questions. Who's got the phone? Fantastic. Okay, we'll give him the floor. Hands up then. So any questions off the back of what I've said? We've got 10 minutes, so we've got plenty of time. And I'm sure there probably are. So, yeah, fantastic.
Well, I don't know if this is kind of relevant to what we said, but you know how you're talking about how like God, like you're talking about all the evil and stuff. God's if God is that thing, then he must be evil as well. Well, I know that two philosophers, Richard Swinburne and St. Irenaeus, said that suffering makes us, that the reason there is bad in the world is because it makes us stronger and more sympathetic. So, and I think as people, you need that to make you the person you are.
Okay, so thank you for the observation. So you're saying that some philosophers, Richard Swinburne, Irenaeus, said that suffering can exist to make us into better people. So maybe we need suffering to make us into the people we should be becoming. Interesting observation. I think there's certainly a lot of truth in that it is through pain and suffering that our characters can be transformed. Someone said suffering can make you bitter or better. And there is some truth in that. But what I want to say, and be careful that I'm not misunderstood on, is that doesn't mean that suffering itself is a good thing. Because God is big enough to redeem suffering for our good, doesn't mean that suffering itself is a good thing. Suffering wasn't part of God's original design for this world. It's an alien invasion of a good world. And one day suffering will be taken away. There will be no more suffering. So while God can use it for his good, and for our good too, it doesn't make the very things of suffering and the injustice any less unjust, or the evil any less evil as well. So I want to hold those two things in tension. But thank you for the observation. Great. Do we have any others on the text? Yeah, okay. If we go for the ones on the text while we have some time.
Doesn't atheism give better grounds for caring for the environment? This is all we've got. What? Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't atheism give better grounds for caring for the environment? Yeah, I don't know what they're saying.
All we've got.
I don't know.
So let's make the most of it. Yeah. Okay. So I kind of alluded to that at the beginning, saying different worldviews will have different kind of motivating factors. And certainly atheism seems to say that. And please don't mishear me. I'm not saying that if you're an atheist, you don't care for the environment. There are atheists that often put Christians to shame by their care for the environment, so I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, logically, if you follow it through, is it quite such the motivation that it's often presented to be? That is to say, the depressing thing about a materialistic worldview is that not only will my life end in death, but actually this whole solar system, this whole universe will end in death. Bertrand Russell talks about the whole human endeavour, the whole scaffolding of the universe ultimately being destroyed. So actually you end up with nothing. No matter how much I preserve this world for a little bit longer, ultimately it ends up in nothing. And so there isn't that long-term hope, although there might be short-term advantages. I would say the great thing about the biblical worldview is it gives us a long-term, eternal hope for this world. But not simply might I preserve it for a few more years, but I'm going to be a part of something that's going to last, which is even better. Great. Next question.
Next question. And how should we live then to take care of the environment? Should it be incidental in our life, or should it be a major focus?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really thoughtful question. How should we live to take care of the environment? How much of a focus should it be? I don't think I've got an easy answer for that. It's like, how much of your finances should you put into that, or how much of your time should you invest in that? And I think our circumstances in life may dictate that. I think some people, your organisation, Our Rocha, for instance, are committed full time to trying to do that. And that's part of their Christian commitments. And they're seeking to do that. I don't think therefore it means that every Christian necessarily needs to become a full-time environmentalist, but I do think it means that Christians in the situations that they're in, with the means that are available to them, will seek as far as possible to care for the environments. Now that might look different in different situations. So I don't think, the Bible doesn't give us rule books on exactly what you should do, but it gives us the principle and leaves us to work that out in our situation. And I think that's one thing that you'd have to work through. Yeah. Oh yeah, sorry.
There's the number there if you want to quickly text another one. Got one more here. Why does God wait for someday in the far future to do something for the environment instead of right now?
Okay. Yeah, fascinating question, and I guess related to the question of suffering as well, isn't it? If God is going to sort everything out, both environmentally, in terms of evil and injustice, why not now? Well, the Bible does say that God's going to sort out our worlds. And the Bible also says that the reason why he hasn't done it yet is not because he doesn't care, but actually because he does. That's to say that the Bible says before God makes a new world, he also wants to make new people. Part of the problem of our world is actually the people who live in it. And when we're brutally honest, it's us, isn't it? It could be our selfishness and greed. And so the Bible says God does care about our world, and he wants to change that world, and he will do fully and finally one day. But he also wants to change us and change our hearts, to bring us back into relationship with him, and so we can live in that world the way we were created to. And his patience in holding off, doing that final and full work, is because he's giving us the opportunity to come to know him for ourselves. Now, if we continually reject him and want to go our own way, and ultimately the Bible says there is going to be a day of justice, a day of reckoning. We're going to think about that on Friday. But actually God holds off because he says, look, I patiently want you to have this opportunity to be part of this too, and I want you to experience it. Yeah.
Does anyone else have any more questions? I've got one more, but just open to the floor again if everyone has anything to ask. No? Yes? Go for it.
Well, the one thing was about, you're talking about atheists and people do to the world. I mean, there's two ways I suppose you could look at it. Because have you heard there was a campaign in the bus amongst atheists that said there's probably no God, so stop worrying and get on with your life and stuff. But I suppose you could also argue that, obviously you're not getting, if there's no God, then you're not really getting assessed on your life after you die. But then you could also argue that if there's no God, what you do to the world, if you do bad to the world, it's worse because God's not going to be there, to fix it, and because you feel as if God could perform a miracle.
Yeah. So two ways of looking at atheism, you're saying. One is to say that there is no God, there's no ultimate reckoning, so it doesn't matter what I do. But also, if there is no God, there isn't a God to fix it, so I better get on and fix it myself.
Yeah.
So two kind of ways of looking at the motivation. And certainly they are two ways of looking at it. And the first point I'd say is a very interesting one, isn't it? It's saying, if there is no God, no ultimate day of reckoning, that is discouraging. We want justice to be done, because often it isn't done. I would say that being a Christian doesn't lead to passivity in the face of the world's problems, so I think it leads to activism, and that is certainly what has often been seen through history. The Christians don't say, God will sort it out. But actually often the way God sorts things out is by sending people to work in his world and to do that. And so actually maybe I could be the answer to my prayers, rather than just asking God to sort it out. Maybe there are things that I can do as well. And so not just the organisation at Rocha in terms of the environment, but Christians in other ways, seeking to alleviate suffering, seeking to make the world a better place, seeking to bring about justice. Not saying God's going to do that, I don't need to, but saying because God is ultimately one day going to do it, that encourages me to do what I can do now. Yeah. Should we go for that? Have we got one more? Or was that? Okay. We'll wrap up there in a second. Just to say, if you've got more questions, if you want to chat more, we're not going to kick you out, so do stick around and chat, and do ask more questions. I'm going to be around as well, so you'd be very welcome to ask me questions. Do have a look at the bookstall, and make sure you leave your feedback forms in the box. That'd be really helpful to us and helpful to you if you want to find out more as well. And also tonight, we'll hear about the details of the events. You are very welcome to come down to Kudos tonight, where we're going to be looking at the subject of freedom. What does it really mean to be free? What is true freedom? So we're going to be thinking about that, and there'll be other stuff on offer as well. So I'll hand back. Thank you.